Welcome csc200 class to ex7b. This will be the one that puts everything together from making our database to now adding items to a database from a web page. The last thing we did on our web page was just to add elements to a form and then just display them in a table, but we didn't connect to our database. So we're going to connect to our database and kind of put this all together. What you're going to do is make sure you open up your csc200, and when it opens up in here, the last thing you worked on, hopefully, was ex6 and 7. One was creating the Spongebob database. The other was having the index file and the display A, which actually was the PHP, which actually generated the PHP code to display something to a table. And that's where it displayed on display A. So if I just open up display A here, this is where we kind of made a table that displayed our information. And we went from our index page. This is where our form was. We filled out a form, and then basically it went to, because our form action says display A, it went to display A, and that's where it displayed. So that's what we did for our last exercise of 6-7, just to give you a little review. And you could check out the video to watch that. I'm not going to review it right now. But what you will want to do in this one, this will kind of connect to that. This will be using a lot of the same code, so you will use some of this, but you'll build on it. So what you're going to see in your folder is a new folder called ex7b, and there's a file in there called display B, and you're gonna use that because that's going to be the new one that's going to display information on your page. So you're actually going to copy stuff from display A and put it on display B. So we're gonna use that. So, and you're also going to use this index page. So what I'd recommend, even right now, if you start, is in your ex7 folder. And maybe I'll close these things up before I do any of this, is I'll just go to my index page and I'll right click on it and I'll say duplicate, and it should give it a different name. It's called index 1, and then drag that index 1 right into your ex7b folder. Be very careful to do that and make sure it's in the right folder. So now you're going to have an index in there. Now when you go in here, you can also rename this. So I'm going to right click. Now that it's in the folder, you could rename it, and I no longer have to have it called index.1. It's just going to be index. So make sure you do it right. It highlighted everything. So it's just going to be index.html. So you're going to have that, and you're going to have display B. So that's how you're going to get started off for this exercise. So you're going to use the exact same one to start. And when you open up the index that you just copied, you're going to want to call this ex7b. You could change that. And you could still call it Spongebob database, and maybe even you just want to call it update, because we're going to be updating it. And then everything else can stay the same. So we could use the same code, the form code. There's CSS in there for our form code. Here's actually the form that actually allowed us to enter information and put that into our table. Basically, we didn't put it in a database, we put it in a table. But what you are going to change here is right away you could change this to B, because you're no longer going to be going to display A. That was our previous one. Now you're going to be going to display B, and make sure that's exactly how that's named, display B. So that's all you have to worry about right now, and then everything else should be okay, at least with that file. So I'm going to save that index, and if you want to open up display B just to take a look at it, you can see I have a lot of comments in here. There's a little bit of HTML in here. Here's some. This is PHP, because there's our opening PHP tag, our closing PHP tag. Then we have some HTML, and it says display updated database, which is what we're going to be doing. And there's a little bit of style in there for the table. And then there's also some more PHP code. Now the next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to open up our terminal and connect to our database, because we want to take a look at it, because we want to make sure we know the name of the database and all that kind of information. So to do that, if you go to Window and just say New Terminal, and it should say Bash, and it should say Bash, and it should say your username, and all that you have to type in here is, if you remember, is phpMyAdmin-control CTL, and then just a space, and then install. And then just hit enter, and let's see what I did wrong. If you type it wrong, and I I missed something in there. I spelled admin wrong, so you just have to do it again. phpMyAdmin-control, and then space install. You just have to do it again, and that should connect. And there's my URL there, and I want to connect to that, and I just want to say open, and that'll open up phpMyAdmin. and we don't have a certain database open, but there I could see it's called ex6SpongeBob. If you called it something else, I could even click on it if I want to see it. There's my Spongebob, and there's my characters, and that's the database that I had started with kind of 6 items in there. We had an ID, we had first name, last, species, gender, and city. And also notice that all our columns that we used here, we just used lowercase. So we'll need to know some of that, and remember that our server is 127.0.0.1. We could also use localhost. I think that was working too. And notice that our table is characters. So we don't have to do anything with this yet, but we will. So I'm going to go back, and I could just go back to, here's my other tabs. I could just keep bash running, or I could, kind of put bash down here, I guess, if I just want it out of the way. And it's telling me that the username is, that's my username. You have your username for Cloud9. All right, so what we're going to do here is we're going to start working on this so that we can connect to our database. We haven't done that yet. We actually have our form done because that's what we did last time. That's why we copied our index page. We only changed this display B, and we only changed kind of the title of our page a little bit, but we're going to make some other changes now, and that's all going to be done to display B. The first thing it says is there's comments here, PHP comments in the PHP code up here, and we're going to create variables for our MySQL server. And I even put little things here to call them host, user, password, and DB name. You don't have to do that, but you might as well, since I have it listed there. Now, if you forget what this stuff is, that's what we did on. You could even check display A, and you could open up display A, and did we do it there? And these are not the variable. These are the variables from the form fields. These are not our variables for the database. So we do need the variables from the database. So that's not the one we want. So I'll close up display A for now. And the last time we connected to a database was, I guess, EX5. So I'll open up EX5 and just be aware of what you're opening, because here's index.php. And what I'm doing here is I'm going to highlight this, and because these are the last ones I used. Now these names can change, but I could just copy these if I want, and then go back to display B, and that at least gives me a start. Now you can see here I called it host. Instead of server name, I called it host. Username, called it user. You could do that, or you could leave it the way it is. And then password, PW, it's just a little shorter. And then DB name will keep the same. Now remember, localhost, we can keep it the way it is. User, that's my username. You're going to have to put in your username here. Password we leave blank because we didn't have a password, and we don't when we go into phpMyAdmin. And database, we're not going to go into world, and just from what I saw here, it's ex6SpongeBob, exactly like that. So whatever you named your database, that's what it's got to be. So I'll just highlight this, and I'll do ex6SpongeBob. So that's the start of this. We're connecting to our host, our user, our password, and that's what we need first to just connect. And then it also says set variables that represent values from form fields. Now that one is the one we did from display A, so we already have that. So I could just open up display A, and I could copy these, because then I'll be done with that. I could use the exact same ones, first, last, species, gender, and we're not going to put in city because city's default. We're not going to put in ID because ID's default. But I'll copy these, and I'll go back to my display B and put this in here. And if you have any extra space, because I left extra space in there just so you could see there'd be more lines there, you could get rid of that. So that's the way we're going to start. So we have variables, and notice that all PHP variables start with the $, and we have those. And you don't want to have any of these be the same either. They should be different from this group to this group. So that's what we have first as far as our form, because we are still going to use our form. And now moving along, and I'm going to, let's see, I don't think I need anything from this. I'll close up display A just so I'm not confused with a bunch of tabs open here. I'll try to keep as many. And again, this one, since I opened up the index PHP, I'm going to close that as well. And I'm going to go back to index. This is my index here. I don't think I have to do anything yet. But here's kind of our connection. And now what it says is connect to MySQL server using not the database name. So we're just going to connect to the server, and then we're actually going to connect to the database. So we're going to make two connections here. and we did this last time, and I just told you to close this up, but you could open this up again if you want to do this. If you want to open up index, that way you could use the one that you actually set up. And remember, this create connection has a create connection, it has a check connection. Let's see what ours has. Ours says connect, not the database name, and it also says confirmed you're connecting. So we're going to do this here. So if you already did ex5, you could go here and we could kind of take this stuff here. So we're going to make a variable called the connection. So we're going to do that first. So let me just copy that. And again, I'm doing this from ex5, so I'm using some stuff I already have. So I'm going to put this here. And we're using this variable con for connection. And we're using this MySQLi connect. And we could have went to W3 Schools and went and found this and kind of updated a little bit, but we're just going to use the one we already have. So we'll use this method here, this function or method, MySQLi connect. And instead of server name, we're going to use these variables up here. It's not going to be server name, we're going to use host. And it's not going to be username, we're going to use user. And again, don't forget the $. And again, I think I had the last semester when I had used this, I think I used these smaller names. I should have probably just kept it the same. But anyway, at least they're shorter. So PW and DB name's going to stay the same. So now these are going to be the same that we're doing here. So that's kind of what we're doing, is setting up the variable that just represents the connection. It'll just kind of limit the amount of code that we're using. And now we're going to confirm. So I'm going to go back to this index.php, and this is where we did a check connection. If you remember, we did this the first time to see if we could connect to our world database. And I'm just going to copy that, and I don't want the PHP tag there, so I'm going to copy that. And I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to put this in here, and it's an if-else statement. It basically says if the connection is true, you don't have to put is true, you just have to say if con, and then there's two curly brackets, and maybe I'll tab these over so they look a little nicer, look a little more organized. There's two sets of curly brackets. One, there's an echo if the connection is true, that says, and remember, echo basically displays information on a page, and we're displaying a string, that's why I have quotes, and it says connected successfully to database. And I have P's on here, so they make new paragraphs, and I don't even know if we need that yet. And then we have a space, because before we actually display the database name, which is, and I think this one, we're going to connect to the server. So we actually want to change this, connected successfully. Let's just say server first, because we want to deal with the server. It says confirm you're connected to the server. So make sure it says connected successfully to server. And we don't really have to do anything. You know, you could put, I guess, put server name here and do that one first. So we're going to do one, we're going to do the server, one we're going to do the database. So let's do the server first, and that's called, we called it host. At least that's what that is. So we're going to put that first, and then if it doesn't work, we have this echo connection error. And that's all it's going to say there. And notice the P tag and everything is inside the quote. So this first if-else statement is really just to see if we're connected to the server. And that's all we want to do there. All right, and what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to put, instead of just connection error, I want to be more specific. So I'm just going to say, just to know that we're not connecting to the server. And then if we know we're not connecting to the database, that's something else to troubleshoot. I'm also going to try to connect to the database here. And there is a special function for connecting to the database. This is our connection for connecting to the MySQL server. Now we're going to use one that connects to the database, and it's called MySQLi connect. And I used to have it in the comments here. I might have to update your comments to put it in there. And what you're going to do is you're going to go to W3 Schools. Probably the easiest thing to do is to go to PHP and go all the way down to the bottom. And they do have MySQL here, but we're going to go all the way down to the bottom and look for these phpMySQLi, basically these functions that are here. And I'm going to scroll down, and there's a whole list of them. And this is the one we just used that opens a connection to the server. If you remember, we opened up this one, and this is, they have some generic code to connect to the server, and we kind of used an if-else statement. And I'll go back, and what we want to use now is one called MySQLi select DB. So we're going to have to scroll down. It's an alphabet. These things are in alphabetical order after MySQLi. and I'm going to look for select DB, and there it is, and I'll click on it. Now you're going to see all this code here, and there's connection, there's if, else, there's all this kind of stuff here. The only thing we really want here is really this code. This is all we want. We don't want this other stuff because we already have that. So we want this part here. This is where that function's actually running, that MySQLi select. So I'm going to use that, and I'm going to copy this. And I'm going to go back, and I'm just going to kind of copy this first just to put it in there. But I'm also going to make a variable that represents that. So I'm just going to call it select DB. I'll put a pound sign, and I'll just call it select underscore DB. And I think I'll make sure I have a comment in there that you can see. But I'll just say select DB equals, and it'll be MySQLi select, and it'll say, this says con. Now notice we're using con with 2 N's, so change that. And then what we're going to do here, instead of test, we're going to get rid of test, and we're going to put in the database name. And the database name is database name. So I'm going to copy that and put that here. And that database name should link up to our Spongebob database. So we're going to do that. And then what we'll do is we'll do another if-else statement here right after this. And you can copy the other stuff, or maybe I'll just type it just to get used to it. I'll say if, and then in parentheses, I'm going to put select DB. I'm going to use this one instead of con. I'm going to use pound sign select DB, and it's actually coming up, which is good. So, and we'll do it the same way. You don't have to put a if true or anything like that. And then in our if statement, I'll put my 2 curly brackets. What's going to happen, now here, maybe we can copy this. So I'll copy this line here so I don't have to type it. And we're going to echo connected successfully to database. And you could even put, maybe I'll do it like this. And I should kind of get rid of all this stuff here. I'm going to connect successfully to, and I'll put my period in between here. Remember, that concatenates, and what I'm going to connect to is DB name, and then I'm going to concatenate again and put a period, and then put a period here, a real period, and I could even put an exclamation point. That means that's a good thing. Connected successfully to, and it should say Spongebob. And then if this doesn't work, then we're going to do our else. And remember, our else has to come after this bracket here. So I'll even just type else here, just like we did up top. We'll just follow that and put my second bracket. And then I'll just copy this then and put that in here. And this will say not connected to database. Now that we're being very specific, we're having 2 statements that are going to run so that it'll tell us if we're connected to our host and if we're connected to our database. So we'll know if we connected to our server or if we didn't connect to our server, and we know if we're connecting to our Spongebob database. So we have two statements that are running here, and we might actually want to try this out. I think what I'll do here is I'll save this, and we'll try to, before we take a break, we'll kind of try this out. Now remember, this is my old one here from, and I'll close that up just so I don't have it running. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to index, and I'm going to say preview. Actually, remember, we can't do live preview here because we're working with PHP. I'm going to go to run project, and it'll give us this URL down here. And if you click here and say open, it'll open a new window, and I'm going to look for 7b, and it should go to the index page. Now our index page doesn't tell if we're connected, so I'm just going to put some gibberish in here because we're not actually putting anything in our database yet, so I could just put gibberish here. But when I hit submit, it should go to display B, and let's just see if that works. And it says connected successfully to server localhost, and it says connected successfully to ex6 and I have an extra period there, and I don't have a period there, so I'll fix that. But that actually works. Now we didn't add anything to our database, and we don't have our code here to display it to the page yet because we're in display B. Display B doesn't show that table that we did last time. So, but that's what we're doing first. So this is actually working. So I just want to go back to my display B and just kind of fix up my statements there, because I guess I just had an extra period here. I didn't have a period there, and here I have a period and an exclamation point. So I just want to save them, and then I'll go back here and I'll just refresh it. And now I see the period, and now I see the exclamation point. And what we're going to do next, now that we're actually getting this to work, is we're going to actually use our form to put information in, and then make sure that we're writing a query that actually puts that form information into our database. Doesn't just display to a page, but actually puts it into our database. So it's going to go, so the form information that we put in here, once it goes to display B, is going to come here, and what it's going to do is going to take all that information and put it into the database and display it. So we're going to do that, or we're going to keep working on that next. So we're going to take a break here.